Breaking news overnight, a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas is still in place, but there is, at the very least, a new delay this morning that everyone is trying to get a better handle on what it really means. Here's what we know at this hour. Israel's cabinet needs to vote to ratify the deal. That has not happened as it was expected to. Israel delayed it, citing last-minute issues. Again, what this now means exactly for the phased-in ceasefire and hostage deal, it's unclear. It's all supposed to begin on Sunday. Under the deal, Hamas has agreed to release 33 hostages in the first phase. Israel agreed to release 1,000-plus Palestinian prisoners. All of that resulting in a 42-day ceasefire with hopes it leads to a permanent one. Let's get to CNN's Bianna Golodryga. She's live in Tel Aviv with much more on this. Bianna, help us understand, what is the status here? What is the latest?
Kate, good morning to you. So all of these things remain rather fluid, but the latest, it does appear to be just a delay in the process of getting a security cabinet and ultimately a party cabinet vote in the government here. As you noted, Prime Minister Netanyahu blaming Hamas for what he says is reneging on parts of the deal. Hamas, for their part, are denying those allegations. Everyone I'm speaking with here still believes, though, that a ceasefire deal will go into place as had been agreed upon beginning Sunday night, where we would see the first hostages in phase one of those 33 released here to Israel. Hospitals have been on standby and ready to receive those hostages. In terms of the politics of it all, Prime Minister Netanyahu is facing a lot of headwinds, as we've been reporting now for months, from the far-right elements specifically of his government, of his coalition, who do not want to agree to a deal under these terms. What the latest we have is that Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich has said that his party would agree to stay with the coalition through phase one of the deal, that is the release of those 33 hostages and the pause in fighting, only if the fighting would be allowed to proceed again after phase one. So there you just get a sense of how fluid and fragile this deal is right now. But Kate, when it comes to the hostages coming home in phase one, as you noted, it would be the women, it would be children, it would be men over the age of 50 and those who are critically wounded. And among those women are 5 IDF spotters, our soldiers. Reminder that everyone in Israel is required to serve in the military. These 5 IDF spotters, all young, the ages of 19 to 21. I spoke with the cousin of one of them, that Agam Berger's cousin. She is 20 years old. I spoke with her cousin about what this moment may feel like for them when they are finally reunited, and why there's a bittersweet sense in the country right now.
She's a beautiful young girl who's been 15 months in the hands of people that we know committed the worst atrocities against women in one day. We know what they did on October 7th. We also know from released hostages who came home what they did to hostages in captivity. That's the biggest fear. The physical aspect of it, and I don't need to go into detail. I think everyone who's watching understands what that fear means. But more importantly, the mental and emotional aspect of what kind of trauma something like that can do to a young girl who's 20 years old, who has her whole life ahead of hers.
All right, Bianna Golodryga for us in Tel Aviv. Bianna's going to be all over it. A lot of developments could be coming on this today.
David Sanger, let me start with you. You, of course, have been covering this deal closely. Is there anything to this last-minute hiccup with the Israeli cabinet? How serious is that here?
It could be. We don't know yet. I do know that up to the last few hours before they announced the agreement yesterday, Casey, Hamas was coming up with sort of last-minute things they were putting on the table. It's a very usual technique on their part, and the question is, can that be put down? But the bigger question is, who's right in this dispute between the two? And the answer is really both. So the deal is essentially what President Biden laid out in May. It also, you may notice, this is January. So, that deal did not happen. And I think the fact that they did link up so well, and that Steve Witkoff, who was President Trump's incoming Mideast advisor, was out there in lockstep with Brett McGurk, who was President Biden's equivalent for that and has worked for Republican presidents as well. I think that made the difference because they were able to go to Netanyahu, send Witkoff, and say, this is the deal that Trump wants. And I think that sort of helped put it over the marker.
David, Tom Malinowski, who's a former Democratic congressman, he put out a very interesting thread on Twitter, the first of which says that this was Biden's deal, but as much as I hate to say it, he couldn't have done it without Trump. Not so much Trump's performative threats to Hamas, but his willingness to tell Bibi bluntly that the war had to end by January 20th. And he essentially goes on to say that while Biden did a great job working with European leaders, he did not bring the sort of thuggery to the table that is required in the Middle East. Do you think Malinowski's right about this?
I think he's absolutely right. And the reason that I would say that is, first of all, the relationship between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu is poisonous would be a polite phrase for the term, okay? And second, the fact that they were able to send Witkoff, not Brett McGurk, but Witkoff, on Saturday to see Netanyahu and say, President Trump wants this resolved before Inauguration Day, in part so that it's not on him to go, be the one who was squeezing the Israelis. I don't think the Israelis would have made the deal. I think they would have just said, well, let's just see what we get out of Trump.
Interesting. Mike Dubke?
Well, first, on a serious matter, what's amazing to me is America matters. I mean, that's at the end of the day, what other country, we can have this argument about Trump or Biden, but what other country can step into an international conflict and really have the level of influence that we did in this? So to David's point, I mean, America matters. On the more of a lighthearted side, I'm sick and tired of these two arguing about golf scores. I'm sick and tired of these two arguing about who mattered. The fact that these two gentlemen got together, told their people to get this done, that's what's important here. I wish they would just both take the victory and be happy that we have a ceasefire after all these months.
Yeah, Jaime, what do you make? I mean, obviously, President Biden, we have seen, clearly is not ready to exit, especially the world stage. It's a place that he has always really, he's valued his role as, even when he was in the Senate and he was on the Foreign Relations Committee, he clearly doesn't want to give all the credit to Donald Trump. But I will say the people that work for him have been willing to do it.
Yeah, look, I agree with Mike. I think people across the country are sick of the back and forth. I think people want to see some bipartisanship. And so for the start of this new administration, I think this is a good sign that there could be some glimmers of hope for bipartisanship. But secondly, look, I think President Biden and Vice President Harris have been clear about their stance on this, and they've worked very hard to get here. And so, yes, I do think Donald Trump helped push this over, but I don't want to take the credit away from the president and the vice president. They were very clear about this deal. They were very dogged about it. They wish this would have happened in May, but it did not. But I think you're right. President Biden's having a hard time this week. He has a couple of days left in office. He's enjoyed being president. It was not his choice to not be president. Let's just be honest about that. But it's going to be tough for him as he watches Donald Trump take office again. You remember, when he took office a couple years ago, he wanted to save this country's soul. He doesn't really feel like he's done that. So I do think there's some things that he's grappling with over the next couple of days that are going to be tough for him.
David, one thing that has hung over this deal is, of course, assuming that this stays on track and we see these hostage releases on Sunday, is going to be the imagery and the parallels for an outgoing President Biden with an outgoing President Carter. Jimmy Carter reflected a little bit on this dynamic back in an interview he did in 2015. I want to watch that and then we'll talk about it.
I hadn't been to bed for 3 days and 3 nights. I had just been negotiating with the Iranians and with 12 other countries to get the release of our hostages who had been in prison for more than a year. And at 9 o'clock that morning, they were already in the airplane ready to take off from Tehran. But the Ayatollah Khomeini kept them there until after I was no longer president.
And your colleague Peter Baker in his analysis mentioned that this has been hanging over this is something the White House is very aware of, the president's aides have been very aware of. How does this kind of echo today?
Well, first of all, this could well spill into Monday. It could spill beyond. Hamas at various moments made the argument they weren't certain where all of the hostages were. The second reason that this may hang over is the great thing about the Jimmy Carter tape that you showed there is all the hostages walked off the plane.
Right.
And here we know that of the numbers that we're hearing, not everyone is alive. And some of those hostages are going to, come back as remains. And so this is going to be both joyous and soul-crushing at the same moment. And it's also going to make you wonder, had the deal been able to come together earlier, how many of those lives could have been saved?